In this conversation, we're going to talk about bone tissue. So, what we're going to learn in this section is to identify the cell types in the bone and their purpose and function. So, the thing about bone tissue, the overall general of it, it's dense, it's support connective tissue. So, when we learned about our tissues and the categories, it is dense connective tissue that is supportive. It is going to contain specialized cells. It's going to have solid extracellular matrix with collagenous fibers. Extracellular is outside of those cells. So, with these characteristics of bone, the reason for that dense matrix, right, the dense connective tissue, is because there are lots of calcium salts deposited. And these calcium salts, they help to lead to that support structure of the bone. The bone tissue is also going to have something called osteocytes. Anytime you see this word site, cell, so they're bone cells, osteocytes. And those osteocytes are going to be found inside these little grooves, I guess you would call them, called lacunae. Okay, lacuna and lacunae. One is singular, one is plural. They're going to be organized around blood vessels because believe it or not, your bones still need blood. They need blood to bring in nutrients and to take away the waste. And so, um, next term you need to know is canaliculi. The canaliculi are going to be narrow passages. Think about canal, right? Narrow passages that allow for the exchange of nutrients, waste, and gases. Okay, so some gases are nutrients, some gases are waste. And so they just kind of throw that in its own little thing over here. The periosteum. The periosteum is the outer cover of the surface of the bones. You're going to find them along the bone, except not at the joint. Okay. They're going to consist of an outer fibrous and inner cellular layers. So when we're looking at that bone matrix is going to be made of calcium phosphate. So here's your chemical makeup of calcium phosphate, CO3, PO4, and there are two PO4s. So that is going to make up about 2/3 of the bone mass almost. So with that, you're going to have interactions with that calcium hydroxide, CaOH2, and it's not H2, it's OH. That means there's two OHs, two hydroxides. They're going to interact with the calcium hydroxide to form crystals of hydroxyapatite. So the calcium phosphate is going to react with the calcium hydroxide to form hydroxyapatite. That is a lovely, lovely, lovely formula, isn't it? You will also find that they incorporate with other calcium salts, such as calcium carbonate, and other ions, such as magnesium. So, with that, if a bone is lacking a calcified matrix that looks normal, I'm sorry, excuse me. If a bone is lacking a calcified matrix, it could look normal, but it's actually flexible, and we do not want flexible bones. Okay. So that's a no-go right there. So in that bone matrix, it's made up of also matrix proteins. I had told you about the collagen and its fibers. Well, collagen is made of proteins. It's about 1/3. So about 1/3 of the bone mass is those collagen fibers. And like I told you, about 2/3 of the bone mass is going to be made up of that calcium phosphate and everything in between for the rest. That's why they give you the abouts. I'm not going to hold you to those numbers in this course. All right, so your bone cells. Your bone cells are going to make up about 2% of your bone mass. Okay. Four types of bone cells. You got your osteogenic cells, your osteoblast, your osteocytes, and your osteoclast. Notice what they have in common is the word osteo is the root. osteo. That means bone. Okay. So your bone cells, like I said, only going to make up 2% of that bone mass. So let's look at each of these cells individually. So you have your osteogenic cells. Basically, they're going to be stem cells. Here's a nice little, we're looking in the medullary cavity. So we're looking along the compact bone, and this is medullary cavity. Here is your osteogenic cell. It's going to be a cell that divides. That's what stem cells do. They are divider cells. Okay. There's different levels of stem cells, but we're going to keep it light on this one right here. So anyway, these stem cells, when they divide, they are going to produce osteoblast. Okay, so let's check out an osteoblast. Right here is an osteoblast. And what that is, it's an immature bone cell. This osteoblast is going to secrete organic components of matrix. So here's a deal. I got a little kind of remind for you. When you think about blast, choom, right? It's going to secrete. So if you can imagine the can of silly string that is blasting, that's what osteoblast does. It secretes, maybe not to that level, but come on, let's just have a little fun with it. Um, Secretes organic components of the matrix. Okay, so we're moving on to the osteocyte. The osteocyte, that is a mature bone cell that helps to maintain the bone matrix. Okay, so this one is going to secrete the components to make the matrix. This one is a mature bone cell to help to maintain the matrix. The osteogenic cell is going to divide to make this one, the osteoblast. Now, the thing about bone, it's great that we're making it, but I got to tell you, it's also breaking down. We are breaking down bone and making bone and breaking down bone and making bone. So the thing is, if you're not making bone, you're still breaking it down. And so that's something that needs to get looked at because then we don't want to end up in situations of osteopenia or osteoporosis. Those would be the most two basic ones. And so osteoclast. What an osteoclast is, it is a cell that is going to secrete acids to dissolve bone matrix. So osteoclast breaks down bone. Okay. Osteoblast is going to blast its organic components to make bone. And the osteocyte is going to keep that bone up, maintain that matrix. All right. Hope all of those little helpers helped you. All right, so let's talk about those osteogenic cells, right? So we got these osteogenic cells we're talking about right here. Um, they they're also mesenchymal cells that are going to divide to produce osteoblasts. I'm kind of already told you all of this, so I might kind of scoot through. They're located in the inner cell layer of the periosteum and in the endosteum. Okay, so the periosteum is going to, ooh, I don't have a good picture. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is going to be the periosteum, right? And then what lines the medullary cavity is going to be the endosteum. Okay, just think endo, um, or endosteum. They're going to assist in the repairing of fractures. So you can see here in that endosteum. So this is just like a little deep dive into the picture. Your osteoblast, talked about those. They're going to be immature. They produce new bone matrix during osteogenesis. Bone making, genesis, right? Also, another word you're going to hear for that is ossification. Be familiar with both of those words, actually. Osteogenesis and ossification. So when the matrix is produced by those osteoblasts, but it hasn't been calcified yet, that's going to be termed osteoid. Anytime you have oid on something, it usually means it's not a full-blown whatever it needs to be. Okay? Like for example, in a Eukaryotic cell, you have a nucleus. But in a prokaryotic cell, no, it doesn't have a membrane. So we call that a nucleoid. Okay, so it's basically, in this case, the term oid. It is a suffix and means it's not ready yet. It's not calcified yet. And so these osteoblasts, they're going to be surrounded by bone matrix and eventually become those osteocytes that we talked about. So there's your osteoblast. These are the same pictures we saw before. So move into those osteocytes. Those are going to be those mature bone cells that do not divide. Okay. They're going to live in the lacuna, if it's singular, and that's found in between the layers of the matrix. They're going to have cytoplasmic extensions that pass through the canaliculi. And essentially, that's how messages pass. That's how your nutrients pass. That's how your waste pass. And so through those cytoplasmic extensions. Who knew there was so much to bone? Uh, well, physiologists did, and you do too now. So anyway, there are two major functions to help to maintain the protein and the mineral context of the matrix. They also help to repair damaged bone. So this is the picture that we showed you before. Moving on to those osteoclasts. Remember I told you the class, you can think about clashing. They're gonna break down and clash, but make sure it's classed. They're going to absorb and remove bone matrix. Okay. They are large cells. They're multinucleated, which means they have more than one nuclei. They're going to secrete acids and also protein digesting enzymes to help to dissolve the bone matrix and release stored minerals. There's minerals stored in the bone matrix. And so the osteoclasts are going to release those to the body. If the body needs them, it's going to go to the bone to get them sometimes. All right, so this is called osteolysis, bone cutting. Lysis means to cut. It is very important in homeostasis. So the osteoclasts are going to be derived from from the same stem cells that produce monocytes and macrophages. We won't be getting into your white blood cells now, but we'll talk about, you'll learn about that in A&P2. All righty. So let's go ahead and check out some compact bones specifically and spongy bones specifically. Here we're going to go ahead and learn how to compare the structures and the functions of both of them. Okay, so let's talk about the functional unit of the compact bone. The functional unit of the compact bone is called the osteon. Okay, let's get a nice little marker here. Thought I was going to have a, there we go. My laser pointer, I guess. Osteon is the functional unit of that compact bone. Okay, inside that osteon, you're going to find a central canal, and that central canal is going to contain blood vessels. You'll also hear this term as Haversian canal, too. You may hear that term also. All right, so with that, you have perforating. What does that perforating mean? Kind of to kind of cut through, right? So perforating canals are going to be perpendicular to the surface of the bone. And that is what's going to carry the blood vessels deeper into that bone tissue and also the marrow. So another term, so by the way, you have to know all of these terms. And so it's a good time to really practice with them right now. The lamella or the lamellae. Lamella is singular, lamellae is plural. Those are going to be the layers of the bone matrix because it's in layers. When they're in circles, they're called concentric lamellae, right? Because they surround the central canal. I'm going to give you a picture here in just a moment. There's interstitial lamellae. Those are basically going to fill the spaces between each of the osteon. And then you have circumferential lamellae. They're going to be at the outer and the inner bone surfaces. So let's check it out. So here is an osteon. It basically looks like the ring of a tree. Okay, that whole structure is the osteon. Okay, so The center of it is the central canal or Haversian canal. You could put either one. Lacunae. These are basically those divots where you are going to find your bone cells, where you're going to find your osteocytes. That's where they stay. Alrighty, so your lamella. Okay, so these rings, each of these concentric rings that make up that osteon, those are your concentric ones, concentric lamellae. The interstitial lamellae, those are the ones that go in between each of those osteons. And then we were talking about the circumferential lamellae. They're going to be at the outer and the inner layers of the bone. So we don't really see them in this version here, this picture here. This is a wonderfully labeled picture. It's going to explain to you everything that I just told you about. And so we'll just kind of keep it light. We can see here. So this right here, that's going to be your osteon. Okay, so what they did is they just took this out and put it on over here. In each of those osteons, the osteon, you got your central canal or your Haversian canal. Um, and then these are your concentric lamellae, the ones that make the quote tree rings, right? And the ones in between are interstitial lamellae. Okay, so you can see through each of the central canals, you have blood vessels and nerves. It's not showing you the nerves there, but you got blood vessels and nerves that are going through. Okay, so this is just another nice video showing you the orientation of the direction of the collagenous fibers. As you can see in one concentric lamellae, uh, you can see the fibers go in one direction, and the next one they go in the opposite direction, and the next one they go in the opposite direction. This further helps to provide extremely strong structure. So your spongy bone. Let's go into the spongy bone. The thing about your spongy bone, it doesn't have osteons. Okay. Instead, what they have this network of matrix, and it's called trabeculae. Um, and it doesn't have capillaries and venules. Okay. You will find red bone marrow that fills the spaces between the trabeculae. And that red bone marrow helps to form blood cells, red blood cells. Um, it's going to contain blood vessels. Those blood vessels are going to supply nutrients to the osteocytes via the action of diffusion, right? The movement from a high concentration towards a low concentration, whatever those ions are. If you have nutrients coming in, high concentration of nutrients outside coming in towards that spongy bone, diffusing down that concentration gradient, just taking your bio 1111 and applying it right here. Your yellow bone marrow, that's going to be found in other sites of spongy bone. Okay, it's going to store fat, and it's also going to be found in the medullary cavity of your compact bone. So let's check it out. Here's your structure of your spongy bone. You can see it is very, very it just has this network, and this strong network of trabeculae, it literally helps to provide the ability to absorb impact. Okay. Otherwise, if this whole end were compact bone, your femur head would snap. Yeah. So this is just perfectly made. So with your weight-bearing bones, this is kind of what I've been telling you already. Your trabeculae and the epiphysis, is going to transfer forces from the pelvis to the compact bone of the femoral shaft, right, to the diaphysis. The medial side of the shaft is going to compress. That's going to cause tension on the lateral side. So basically, it's going to be distributing weight. That's fancy stuff for distributing weight. And so you can see here's the force that is applied, and it is distributing weight all throughout. and it provides the tension on the lateral shaft as it comes, and it provides that force to the medial shaft. So let's talk about the outer portion of it, the membrane that covers the outside of the bones. That's called the periosteum. Okay. The periosteum is basically going to be found uh, on the outer parts of the bone, except within the joint cavities. Okay. Because you end up having to have your cartilage for the articular cartilage for not all joints, but yeah, some joints, most joints. All right, so the periosteum is going to be on the outer fibrous layer and inner cellular layer. Okay, that's what it has to it. It's made of an outer fibrous layer and an inner cellular layer. So the fibers are going to be interwoven with the tendons. Okay, with those of the tendons. That's how you get muscles to attach to bones. The tendons are going to be muscles attaching to bones. You're also going to have what is called perforating fibers. Those become incorporated into bone tissue. Um, those perforating fibers, they help to increase the strength of the attachments. Now, the function of the periosteum is going to isolate bone from the surrounding tissues. Okay. It's going to provide a route for blood vessels and nerves. And it's also going to help to participate in bone growth and repair. So this is getting a little view. And so here is a little cutaway of a long bone. You can see here, you're going to have your circumferential lamellae. Okay. And then on the outer part, we're looking at the periosteum. This periosteum includes a fibrous layer on the outside and the cellular layer on the inside. Okay. You can see all of the other parts of the bone that we've discussed. Now the endosteum, notice I say it is endosteum, but sometimes you have to say it how you spell it, friends. Okay. This is how you get through. I had to spell everything 100% right also. I want you to know you are not alone in that. Okay, so back to this. Endosteum. It is incomplete cellular layers that are going to line the medullary cavity. Okay. With that, the purpose is going to activate during the bone growth, repair, and remodeling. Okay. We think about growth growing from a small individual to a large grown-up adult individual. Repair. Something happened, it needs to repair itself. Remodeling. Remodeling is not necessarily an injury. Sometimes remodeling is just that the osteoclast are removing those those salts from the bone, okay? And then putting them back together with the osteoblast and back and forth and back and forth. So the endosteum is going to cover the trabeculae of the spongy bone. It is going to line the central canals of the compact bone. It is going to consist of flattened layers of osteogenic cells. And so when we look at this, you can see the endosteum right here on the inner part. So, all righty, so let's talk about formation and growth. So the learning outcomes, basically, what are we going to learn in this section? We want to be able to compare the mechanisms of the endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification. You're like, what? All right, bone development. Okay, ossification, osteogenesis, bone formation. We introduced that word a few slides back. All righty, so ossification is bone formation. Calcification, the deposits of the calcium salts. And when does that happen? During ossification. Okay. There are two different types of ossification, endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification. So some humans grow up until the age of 25. That was not me. I think I stopped growing at 11, but oh well, maybe 13. So anyway, endochondral ossification is how most bones are going to form. It's going to be the primary ossification center that develops in the hyaline cartilage. And so basically, as you go from an infant into a toddler, into an adult, the infant's bones are primarily cartilage. And then it is going to ossification is going to take place. And that cartilage is going to be replaced with bone tissue. And there's 7 main steps to this. So you have something called interstitial growth, which is going to be the growth in the length. Okay. Then you have, during the interstitial growth, you'll have events of secondary ossification centers develop. Okay. So not just in one spot, they happen in many spots. That's what that means. You have something called epiphyseal closure or completion of the epiphyseal growth, which is essentially the closing of the epiphyseal plate. And that is going to take place at what end? The epiphysis. And so what happens is when you have the width of the epiphyseal cartilage, it basically, when you look at it, you can see the timing of the endochondral ossification, the changing of the cartilage skeletal system into the actual mineralized skeletal system. And so the former location of those epiphyseal cartilage is going to be visible on X-rays as called the epiphyseal plate or the epiphyseal line. And it will remain after the epiphyseal closure. So let's take a peek. So this is going to be that hyaline cartilage, and you can see enlarging of cartilage of chondrocytes, which cartilage cells, within calcifying matrix. So you're starting to get calcification. So as the long bone grows, okay, you can start to see the epiphysis be distinct from the diaphysis, be distinct from the epiphysis, okay? Because you actually are going to have a distinction of that epiphyseal line. And so you can see the blood vessels, you can see the forming of perichondrium, which is going to be in between the epicondrium and the endochondrium. Then, as the bone continues to grow, you can see that development of the medullary cavity, and then you can identify that primary ossification center. Okay, you can see that going on here, where basically the bone development, that's the primary spot that it's happening first. Alrighty, so as the remodeling occurs through growth, as the individual gets older, you're going to get an increase in the length of the bone and the diameter of the bone. And then also an increase of the size of the medullary cavity. Okay, so what you're seeing here is less of that hyaline cartilage, more of that compact bone, then eventually less of that hyaline cartilage, which is basically going to be on the articular surfaces at this point, right? And what once was that hyaline cartilage turns into the area of spongy bone. So we can see the epiphyseal cartilages, right? You can see the growing of those long bones. It's a good way to age a child. All right, so let's talk about appositional growth. Appositional growth is going to be growth in width. Okay. It's when the bones are going to thicken, when they're going to strengthen, right? When those long bones get thicker and stronger. The layers of these circumferential lamellae are going to be added at the outer surface. Um, and then the deepest layers are going to get replaced by osteons. Okay. So during this process, that's when you have that remodeling taking place. So you got your osteoclasts are slowly going to be removing matrix at that inner surface. And when they do that, right, the osteoclast, the breaking down, okay, don't take that as a negative. It's removing matrix, okay? It enlarges a medullary cavity, is what it does. Otherwise, if you didn't do that and the bone got thicker and wider, but you didn't enlarge the medullary cavity, you would have a very hard, compact bone, which actually is not to benefit because it does not withstand the forces the way it needs to and could snap a lot easier. All right, so the next one, the second one is intramembranous ossification, also called dermal ossification because it happens in the dermis. It is going to produce dermal bones such as the mandible, which is the lower jaw, and the clavicles, which are your collarbones. Remember, you have to know these official words, mandible and clavicle. There are five main steps to the intramembranous ossification. And so in this set of steps, you're basically going to see different types of mesenchymal cells. They're going to start to cluster together in here. So you can you can see these purple mesenchymal cells. Boom, 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 boom. They start differentiating into osteoblasts. And that term differentiation, that just means, remember uh, we talked about the stem cells and how the osteoblasts essentially are going to be a result from those stem cells. So when we talk about differentiation, we're literally talking about the stem cells becoming very specific osteoblast cells. So then those osteoblasts are going to secrete the organic components into the matrix, which results in the osteoid, which means not quite mineralized yet. It's starting to get mineralized after that with calcium salts and then eventually form the bone matrix. So we're just on part 1 of 5. And so with that, the second one, as ossification continues forward, some of the osteoblasts are going to get trapped inside. So these were ones out here, some of them get trapped inside and they differentiate into osteocytes, right? The osteocytes, if you recall, are the mature functioning bone cells. The developing bone is going to grow outward from that ossification center in small struts called spicules. These are just struts, these kind of extensions, right? When you strut, you kind of move forward with it, right? So those are called spicules. And the term spicule is actually pretty generic because you will find the term spicule in other biological vocabulary. And you'll be like, huh, but it's more about the shape, the extension of it. So your blood vessels are going to begin to branch within the region and grow between the spicules. And so basically that rate of that bone growth is going to accelerate when with oxygen availability and nutrients availability. So when you tell your kids to have their calcium drink, whatever that looks like, there's a reason for that. When you tell them to eat their greens because they need their phosphorus, you don't have to go into the details. Just tell them you need it to grow. Alrighty. So then you get that continued deposition of bone by those osteoblasts still. And then they're going to basically be close to blood vessels, which results in the plate of spongy bone where the blood vessels are going to weave throughout. So then, that last piece of that intramembranous ossification, You can see here, you're going to continue to have remodeling, subsequent remodeling. Basically, as those bones grow, you're going to continue to have more remodeling. And then the osteoblasts on the bone surface are going to, they're going to have form that connective tissue and become the periosteum. So let's check out this next piece. So your blood has to be supplied to the bones. Okay. The bones do not work in a vacuum by themselves. They need nutrients. They need waste to be removed. And so you have nutrient arteries, and the veins are going to remove the waste. So most of your bones are going to have one of each, but some actually have more. And they're going to pass through the little tiny holes. We learned about the holes in our last video. We learned that word foramen or foramina, right? Little tiny holes in the diaphysis. You're also going to have something called metaphyseal vessels. And what they're going to do is they're going to supply blood to the epiphyseal cartilage where that bone growth is going to occur. You also have periosteal vessels. They're going to supply blood to the superficial osteons, and then also to the secondary ossification centers. What's the big picture here? Okay. You need blood to bring nutrients to take away waste. That's the big picture. Okay. And all of the sections are going to get them in one way or another. So there's a nice little picture of what I was telling you about. I'll let you kind of go through it. You can kind of go back and forth between the last slide. The periosteum. So the periosteum is also going to contain lymphatic vessels, a network of those, and also sensory nerves. Wow, that was very, very quick. That's nice. Okay. Thank you for listening.